Welcome to the show, Greg Cosell. He's the NFL Films' senior producer, also hosts ESPN's NFL Matchup. And Greg, you've been studying so many of these prospects that we know your days start early and they end probably pretty late with little to no time off as you also prepare for the NFL draft.
That would be true, Maddie. Yeah, I think I've probably seen now, I don't know, maybe 125, 130 players in detail with more to go. And some I've seen a little bit of, but I don't feel comfortable until I see guys, I have my own way of doing it. And I have to feel like I've seen them in detail before I really feel comfortable talking about them.
Okay, how much film study does that require on each guy till you feel comfortable? I'm sure it's different for every player, but if you had to give us an average of the amount of time you spend on film for each prospect or player, what would you say that is?
It's different for each position. Defense is the toughest.
Hmm.
Defense, you have to watch full games. You've got to watch every play. And so for defensive players, I normally try to get through 4 full games, sometimes more, depending on who the player is. Um, and then if it's, let's say, a linebacker, I'll also watch all their tackles, all their plays. So I'll watch full games and then all their plays. You can't just watch all their good plays because, everybody looks pretty good if you just watch all their good plays.
Everybody looks good in a highlight reel. I'm actually interested,
Yeah.
Greg, in what you said about how defense is a little tougher. I was always under the impression maybe offense would be tougher given the different kinds of concepts that college offenses run and the different positions players are in basically compared to what they're going to be in the NFL. Why is defense tougher to watch film?
Because defense, particularly certain positions, guys don't make a lot of plays. Like you could,
Right.
like if you look at a corner statistics, a corner could have 20 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 5 passes defense for the whole season. That doesn't really tell you anything about how he plays.
Right.
So you have to watch full games. Safeties, it can be the same. Safeties might have 30 tackles, especially if it's a safety that tends to play deep based on that team's defensive philosophy. So you've got to watch full games. Offensive linemen, you've got to watch full games. Sometimes receivers, you can watch just their targets because the reality is, while all coaches want receivers who are interested in blocking, receivers are not usually drafted particularly high just because they're good blockers. So if a guy catches 90 balls and has 150 targets, I can watch 150 targets and I'll feel pretty comfortable that I know what that guy is.
Yeah.
So tight ends, you got to watch their targets, but you also have to watch their offense because they block. So you have to see how they block.
Well, we're going to talk about some linebacker prospects today, and we know you've watched a lot of film on those linebackers.
I
But
have.
before we get to the linebackers, we had a Twitter question, 2 Twitter questions this week about who is the one offensive and defensive player you want to see break out or you expect to have a breakout season for the Bills this year. Do you have a couple names that come to
Uh,
mind with offense and defense and the word breakout?
Breakout, I mean, certainly Gabriel Davis is the obvious one, but I don't know if he'd be viewed as a breakout given what he did in the playoffs. I think it depends on what Ken Dorsey decides to do that might be a little different than Brian Dable, because I don't think he'll change anything significantly, but a new guy always has a little bit of a different approach. So I'm kind of wondering what Dawson Knox's year will be like. I don't expect him to catch 90 balls, but I think he's very talented, and I think that he's starting to move in that direction. So I think that Dawson Knox might be someone to keep an eye on. I guess what I'll be curious as well to see offensively is what their run game approach is, given that they did run it more toward the end of the season. And I wonder if that's something they'll continue to do, or if when push comes to shove, they'll just say, we have Josh Allen and we'd rather see the ball in his hands. So, there's a couple things on defense. Breakout. I mean, they still have a lot of young defensive linemen. I mean, you got Rousseau, you got Basham, you got Epinesa. I think they would like to see those guys break out and be more, sacks that's a stat, and a guy, gets 18 sacks. That's great. But I think they'd love to see those guys really become more of a factor as pass rushers. And obviously they have Von Miller now, so they can do more things with their defensive front. But they spent a lot of draft capital these last 2 years on that defensive line, and I think they'd like to see those guys really, play well. Not that they haven't played well, although Basham, I know last year was a healthy scratch in a number of games, so I'm sure they'd like him to be totally cliched to take a step up, whatever that means.
I agree with you. I think they'd love for that group to be able to do that. Before we get to the specific linebackers, Greg, there's a really good conversation here in Buffalo about that position long term. They have Tremaine Edmonds going into the final year of his contract. It's the 5th-year option. Now, look, he's been a nice player, a good player. No one's going to say he hasn't. I think what you're looking for is some more game-changing type of plays. He's also only 23 years old, and he's the quarterback of the defense. But there's a good conversation here in Buffalo on what that position looks like and how they treat it in the draft, considering Tremaine Edmonds' situation.
And that's a great point, Sal, because I think he's been a good player. And, obviously I watch the tape every week, but I'm not just watching him and grading him as an individual.
Right.
But I don't think, I think it'd be fair to say, let's put it this way, based on my tape and what you just said, you're closer to the Bills organization than I am, that he's been a good player, but not an impact player. I think that would be fair. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think in most situations that's correct, yes.
Yeah, so I believe you could make the argument that Matt Milano has been more of an impact player than Tremaine Edmonds. And I really like Matt Milano. I started talking about him with the guys, maybe 3 years ago. So I think, he just re-signed, did he not?
This will be the 2nd year of his 4-year contract extension, yes.
Yeah, so he's going to be there. But that's a great issue, not a great issue, a great question for the organization about Tremaine Edmonds, because he's been a good player, and as his agent should, he'll ask for a lot of money. That's what agents do. That's their job. I'd be very curious to see how the Bills see that going forward, which is why this linebacker discussion is really interesting, because there are some good linebackers in this draft. And if you get one that you think can be a really good player, does that make Tremaine Edmonds expendable simply because of the dollars? Not because you don't want him and he's not a good player, but if you can get a really good young linebacker that you're not paying as much to, at least for 3 years, then, do you want to pay Tremaine Edmonds and I don't know what the going rate for a linebacker is right now. I don't follow that kind of thing really closely, but it's going to be a lot of money.
Yeah, so knowing that and thinking about how Tremaine Edmonds could be worth a lot of money, let's dive into some of these prospects that, maybe Buffalo could be attracted to because of that very reason. So we'll start first with a guy from Wyoming, a popular college here for Buffalo Bills fans because that's where Josh Allen went. Chad Mumma, he had 142 tackles and had 2 of his 3 interceptions he returned for scores. So tell us about Chad Mumma. Why is he a good linebacker in this year's draft class?
Yeah, I like Chad Mumma's tape. And, of course, he'll get the level of competition label lobbied at him because of where he played. But obviously, Logan Wilson from Cincinnati Bengals, he played at Wyoming, so you can obviously make that transition. He's a very intense, competitive player. I love his style of play. He essentially was a stacked backer in the box for the most part, but I thought that he has great play speed and range. He sees it, he goes, and he tackles. That's become a bit of a lost art. When he gets there, he tackles. I thought he saw things quickly. His reactions were quick within the box. If you're going to play middle linebacker or stack backer in the NFL, you have to have a really good feel for working in confined space, slipping blocks, playing off blocks. That's what linebackers kind of do. So he played really fast on tape. I wouldn't say he's sudden and explosive, and he's a little bit high cut. So some people might say his change of direction isn't exactly what you want. But I just really liked the way he played, and I liked the fact that when he got there, he tackled. And I think he's, I don't know where guys get drafted. That's not my thing, as you guys know, but he probably will be a day 2 pick. I think he's a really good prospect.
All right, what do we do with these Georgia guys? We got 3 of them, right? I mean, we got Nakobe Dean, we got Channing Tyndall, we got Quay Walker. I mean, however you want to divide them up, what are the differences between these 3, and what do you like about these guys, and what maybe some of the deficiencies might be, Greg?
Well, they're all different, and that's so now you get into what Sean and Leslie really want in a linebacker. I mean, Nakobe Dean is small. Now, some teams might think small, and they don't want that guy. I mean, I think he's a good prospect, but I can tell you right now, he's really at the bottom end of what you want in terms of height as a linebacker. He's 5'11" and a half.
Right.
But I think he's a really good prospect. He's got great short area quickness and explosiveness. He's kind of sudden in the box. He plays physically. They blitzed a lot. See, that's the thing. He was a function of a defense, Kirby Smart's defense at Georgia. They blitzed a lot, and he was the blitzer. Right. So you have to decide if there's somewhat of a scheme specificity to his game. How will he play if the Bills were to take him and he's not going to blitz a lot? Because as I said, he does have that length issue, being under 6 feet. In some ways, though, he reminded me of a player who played this past year as a rookie and played very well for the Chiefs, and that was Nick Bolton. He came out of Missouri a year ago. He was also under 6 feet, and he played extremely well for the Chiefs. So that might help Dean's projection in the eyes of many. The other two guys, believe it or not, I like more than Dean as far as their projection. Quay Walker is almost 6'4" and 240 pounds. And to me, he's everything you want in a linebacker. He's big. He moves really, really well. I think he can do everything. I think he's, don't forget that Georgia gets all these 5 stars. So what you have with George is none of these guys play every snap. But his profile is exactly what teams want. He's a really good run defender in the box. He can scrape, he can flow, he can play through contact. He's athletic. I think he's one of those guys that from a physical athletic standpoint, I think he has it all. And then there's Channing Tyndall, who I could make an argument is the best of the 3. He's explosive. I mean, this kid is an explosive athlete. They actually used him at times to rush the quarterback off the edge. I mean, that's the way they used him in their sub defenses. But he's got great sideline to sideline play speed and range. He made a ton of plays outside the hashes. He's featured as a blitzer. He was a pass rusher, as I said. He's got a really kind of compact coiled frame. He's 6'2", which is really good length as well. I really like Channing Tyndall. He jumped off the film to me. Of the 3, he's the guy that when I watched Georgia, and believe me, guys, I had to watch Georgia. I could probably tell you their plays, because they had 8 guys. So I had to watch Georgia, like probably 7 or 8 of their games 3 times.
Wow.
4 times to get through all these guys. So, but I think Channing Tyndall I think he'll be a 3-down linebacker in the NFL sooner than later.
Well, listen, after everything you just said about Georgia, thankfully Kirby Smart did win the national championship.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he would have been out of a job immediately with that group. That's incredible.
Yeah, no, they had so many other guys too.
Yeah, right.
And of course, I'm sure they got 20 more 5 stars coming in this year.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Oh my gosh, definitely. I mean, Quay Walker is a name that has been mocked to the Buffalo Bills. There's been a couple linebackers that have been mocked to the Bills at that number 25 spot. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. It's fun to watch these mock drafts and see who people think the Bills are going to draft.
It's funny you say that, Manny, because Walker. I mean, if they like length at that position, like we started this conversation talking about Tremaine Edmonds and what their feeling about him is, if they want somebody with length at that position, Quay Walker 6'4", he's the guy.
Yep.
And you said do it all too. And Sal and I were talking about the Bills want somebody who can do it all. They want somebody who can rotate if need be. And it seems like he's a guy who might be able to do that. Another linebacker we want to ask you about is Devin Lloyd from Utah. He's 6'3", 235 pounds. What makes him stand out in the draft?
I really like, he's another guy that I think he's a multi-dimensional linebacker. He can play all 3 downs. He can blitz. He's really athletic. He's long too, looks long. He kind of reminded me of Darius Leonard coming out of South Carolina State. He's got length, athleticism. He's positional versatility. I really, really like Devin Lloyd. I mean, there are times he's a little bit out of position. I think he's one of those guys, I don't want to say freelances because I don't know that, but I think he's a playmaker. And I think he wants to make plays. And I think that There are just times he gets himself a little bit out of position, and it can look bad, but I think you can coach that. I think that's, I don't want to say it's easy to coach, but I think you can coach that. But I really like him. I think he's got those 3 down linebacker traits, of the Darius Leonards, the Fred Warners, Demario Davis might fit into that category. I know I'm missing a couple of guys, obviously. Bobby Wagner has been that guy for years. And I'm not saying he's going to step right in and be that guy. No one knows the answer to that. But I think Devin Lloyd has those kinds of physical and athletic traits and playmaking traits.
Talk about a taller guy, Brandon Smith of Penn State. I know we got a lot of Penn State fans here in Western New York who know his game really well. What do you see from him on film?
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint, but I did not like him on film. And it kind of, I've been doing this a long time, and I'm wrong, just like a lot of, that's life,
Mm-hmm.
But he was so frustrating to watch, guys, because he's 6'3", 250, and he looks the part, but and he's athletic, and he moves really well. But there was such a distinction, a sharp distinction between his athletic and movement measurables and his play on the field. I mean, he was a great tester too, at the combine, at his pro day. He's a big, fast athlete with explosive traits who rarely played that way. There was little snap and suddenness to his movement. He didn't really play with physicality and functional strength. He didn't really use his hands. If someone could get it out of him, and that's what coaches always believe, hey, look at this guy, look at the traits. If we can get it out of him and the light goes on, and the flashes, he shows a flash here and there. If the flashes can become more the foundation of his game rather than the exceptions, I think he could become a quality 3-down linebacker. But the tape is not kind to him right now.
I'm sure when a coach sees a player like that and his stature and his size and length, and they maybe turn on the tape and aren't that excited, I'm sure it's hard for some coaches to not be like, I want him because I want the project and I want to be the person
Right.
who turns him into something special. I think that's probably what a lot of GMs and coaches go after, is that elite, like, physical freak, maybe looking at him, but not sure about the film, but thinking that, hey, we can turn you into something special with our coaching.
And that happens a lot, Maddie. You're 100% right. And again, there's different philosophies. Some coaches will say, look at the tape and say, this is the way he plays. I don't care what his physical traits are. The tape tells me how he plays. That's the way he plays. Other coaches will say just what you said. This guy is kind of a physical freak to some degree, and I'm going to get it out of him, because if I get it out of him, we might have one of the best 5 linebackers in the NFL, because there's not a lot of 6'3.5", 250-pound linebackers with the movement of Brandon Smith, but he doesn't play that way. And, that's all I can say. I can only tell you what the tape shows. I don't know Brandon Smith. Obviously, teams do their due diligence. They'll talk to him. They'll do all those things teams do. But the tape, like I said, it was not overly kind to him this year.
What do you think about Christian Harris, the linebacker from Alabama, the team that Georgia played in the national championship game?
Yeah, he's kind of a stud.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of his tape, an awful lot of his tape. He fits the profile. He's athletic. He's not as big. He's not as tall. He's only 6 feet, half inch, but he's got great movement traits. He's a good pass defender as well. He can play underneath zone coverage. He can man match on tight ends and backs. At times, he matched wide receivers, depending on Alabama's coverage call. He's got really easy movement and natural quickness in the box. I mean, I really, really like his game. It's crazy. He came out of Baton Rouge, which is where LSU is. He played safety and corner in high school in Baton Rouge and never received an offer from LSU. Went to Alabama. They moved him to linebacker immediately. He started from day one for Nick Saban. So that also tells you something about his capacity to learn, his intelligence, his awareness, his savvy. I think that means something.
Yeah, definitely. The last linebacker we want to bring up is Brian Osimoa from Oklahoma. And reading his draft profile, it says, see ball, get ball. So what type of linebacker is Brian Osimoa?
He's a see ball, get ball linebacker. That's exactly what he is. Now, he's a little smaller. He's only 226, runs well. But he's an athletic movement velocity range player. I mean, this guy, he just moves. That's what he is. I think I might have even said that in my notes, that he's a see it, get it player. I'm looking at my notes right now because I take really detailed notes on these guys. but that's the way he plays, and I think that's his MO. That's sometimes it looks like he was freelancing. Yeah, well, here I'm looking at my notes. He said there was a freelance wild stallion feel to Ossimov, although I said there was no way I can be certain of what he was asked to do and what his specific assignments, responsibilities were on each play. But I said there was a freelance wild stallion feel with a see it, get ball feel to his play. That's the way he played. He ran all over the field. He had great play speed, great range. Fun guy to watch. He didn't really match up man-to-man very much. So if you want your linebacker to do that, then that's a projection.
Yeah, I think about the Bills and all these guys you're talking about and what they like and their traits and their linebackers, and they're not looking for the Ray Lewis, A gap to A gap guy. They're going to let their defensive line kind of eat those guys up and go sideline to sideline. Matt Milano, Tremaine Edmonds. So knowing that, like, what do you think from this group we talked about? Who are the guys who are probably the best fits in that regard? They're more sideline to sideline, not necessarily north and south type of linebackers all the time.
Yeah, well, then it comes down to, Sal, the size issue. I mean, do they want length? Because there's not a lot of 6'3", 6'4" linebackers. I mean, they might like someone, they could like Mumma, who I know visited Buffalo. One guy we didn't talk about who's another small school guy, Montana State, is Troy Anderson, who's played 4 different positions at Montana State.
Wow.
And this past year made the change solely to linebacker. He's 6'3.5", 240-ish, give or take. And, he blew it up at the combine, and he's a guy with excellent play speed and range, not very physical, but, because he's new at the position. So it depends. If you're looking for length, then the Osimoas, the Christian Harris might not be your guy. If you're looking for just pure athleticism and you want that, you've got the Osimoas, you've got the Christian Harrises. Kind of Devin Lloyd would fit everything probably, because he's long and he's a playmaker. Lloyd would probably be the guy to me, but I don't know if he'll be there.
Sure.
And again, I don't know. No one knows, but my sense is he won't be there.
It's interesting that all these linebackers, you can kind of pick and choose what you want. Some guys are smaller, but they're might be more athletic. Some guys are longer, and maybe you want that length on your defense. A lot of the times, the Bills, like we've talked about today, just have 2 linebackers on the field because they play in nickel defense so much. So we'll see what the Buffalo Bills decide to do in the NFL draft. Maybe linebacker is a position that they go with. Is it in the first round or the second round? Who knows? But a lot of people are saying there is going to be depth for that linebacker spot in this year's NFL draft.
Yeah, there's a lot of depth, and it all depends. Like I said, that's why I'm not a good list maker. Everybody wants lists of positions. It's almost impossible to compare, a 6'3" or 6'4" linebacker. It's impossible to compare Quay Walker and Nakobe Dean. They're not the same player. They play the same position, but they're not the same player, and they wouldn't be deployed in the same way.
Yeah, and also, the way offenses has caused defenses to play so differently as well. As Matty just said, the Bills don't even use a Sam linebacker really. They use a weak side and a middle linebacker, and most of their depth guys are guys who know every position, who can do it all, because you never know when you're going to have to be put on the field against these different offensive sets, Greg.
I mean, the Bills last year played the highest percentage of nickel of any team in the league. And there was a stretch of 6-7 games in a row where they only played nickel.
That's right.
So, I mean, I assume that's not going to change significantly. The coaching staff's the same. So they're really a team that plays with 2 linebackers.
Yep, that's what they've become. That's what a lot of the NFL is going toward, because you have to cover all these wide receivers that are out on the field, because the quarterbacks now are tossing the rock like nobody knows. You also have to be able to stop quarterbacks, because some of these quarterbacks are pretty mobile in today's NFL. But, Greg, we want to thank you for the time.
Good stuff, Greg.
Thanks for breaking down some of these linebacker prospects. Definitely feel like we have a better taste of who is in the NFL draft. So appreciate it.
And happy Easter to you and your family.
Thanks,
Take some
guys.
time
Same to you.
off.
Appreciate it. All right.
All right.